speaker will be Abhiram.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, my first encounter with the word terrarium occurred when I was a curious, innocent 9-year-old boy. I just visited my first planetarium, and I knew that terra meant Earth, so I assumed that a terrarium was a museum for Earth. Now, I was obviously disappointed when I found out that it was a glorified plant aquarium, but 5 years later, when I came across a scientific description of the term, I realized that it was a glass container that allowed to the creation of a nurturing environment for plants to grow. Key words here being nurturing and grow. I am Abhiram Saran, and in this speech I will be covering the theme of growth in a terrarium. Now, I'm going to begin with a slightly unusual request. I want you to think about the worst moment of your life. It could have been anything: an academic failure, the loss of a relationship, a debt to someone you loved. It can be both easy to identify and difficult to accept that an event like that happened. But importantly, we've all been there in some way or another. We all know what it feels like. And for me, that moment was a little over 4 years ago, on a beautiful summer morning back home in India, except I was saying goodbye to my childhood friend, my 10-year-old German Shepherd, for the last time. This couldn't have happened at a worse time because my academics were spiraling and my social life was a shambles. So from literally all aspects, my life was falling apart. You see, the reason behind this is that I was a gifted kid, and my parents took me out of a school where I was thriving in and sent me to a prep school where I had no friends, no Wi-Fi, and 50 hours of coursework every single week for the whole year. It was nothing short of torture, and with my personal life up in flames, my academic performance crumbled. I was failing at the one thing I was supposed to do: study. I was a student. And in the end, I started to struggle. My future looked bleak, and I started to question if my life was worth living. But it was then that I realized that even in the darkest moments, at the absolute bottom of the bottomless pit, you will find light. Hope reached out with all its shining glory and offered to me its hand through the SAT. Now, in India, you don't usually take international exams because it's considered both a waste of time and money. It's grad school that you come to the US for, not your undergrad. But I just spent 12 years in the Indian education system, and I realized that this was not for me. I was going to continue to struggle here if I didn't leave. And so I did. I took the SAT with 3 days of prep, and when the results came out, I'd done better than I ever thought I could. I realized that this was my way out. This was my second chance, and I grabbed it with both hands. After a few months and a lot of burnt midnight oil, I'd gone from being an average student in India with no future prospects to an international scholar at one of the best universities in the world, Purdue. I had been at rock bottom, and I'd climbed out. Yes, it was a difficult journey, but I'd grown from it. I had achieved a little amount of progress, and it had given me a fresh start in life. That idea of a fresh start is another thing that can be explored through the lens of a terrarium. As the timeless symphony of life continues, inside a terrarium, new plants are born from the nutrients left behind by their dead ancestors, accounting for a short transition phase in between. Essentially, the cycle of growth continues endlessly. I want to use that idea to talk about transitions and intersections between the phases of life. Now, you could ask me, what is a phase of life? Well, I define it to be anything that has a defined beginning and an end. A phase could be college, a phase could be your 20s, a phase could even be an amount of time when you're happy. These phases can overlap very easily, and crucially, they are not distinct. They can coexist at the same time, and you could experience wildly different emotions in your day-to-day life simply because they're associated with different phases you're going through. For an example, from the 2 examples I gave, you could be a college student and still be happy. And I say that as a guy who's taken 3 years of Purdue math. Now, again, as college students, you could be on top of the world one day and come crashing back down to reality the next. You could make memories that last you a lifetime, and memories you never want to think about again. For me, that happened a little over a year ago when I relapsed. I was doing well at Purdue. I wasn't thriving, but I'd worked hard. I'd healed a little bit, I'd grown, I'd become a slightly better person. But all it took was one bad day, one little push, to send me all the way back down where I started. Sure, the hole was not as deep as it was last time, and perhaps it was a little easier to climb out of, but that didn't make my situation any easier. It didn't make my plight any less painful. But it was in that moment that I came to the understanding that human beings are capable of the most change, of the most learning when they're at their most vulnerable. For all my talk about learning from the past and healing from it, it took a great deal of unlearning for me to realize that I was not defined by what I went through. There was a version of me in the past that I could feel sorry for, and a version of me in the future that I could worry about. But in time, I rebounded from my setback, continuing to grow, continuing to heal, and I would say the biggest moment of clarity that I had was realizing that my past self doesn't think lesser of me for relapsing. He's proud that I achieved the dreams he never thought he could. My future self doesn't perceive me as fragile because I relapse. If I were given the chance to have one interaction with my past self, I wouldn't say any words. I would just give him a hug. And I know my future self would do the same for me. And I hope you know your future self would do the same for you. That is the theme of a terrarium in my interpretation. Progress, acceptance, growth. You could stumble, you could fall, but you know you have it in you to bounce back. And yes, you could counter this by asking, what is the point of self-improvement if you know you could relapse again? What is the point of it all if everything could come crumbling back down? But to me, it is the impermanence of the phases of life that makes them beautiful. And yes, though the terrarium representing your life and your happiness may one day have its glass walls shattered, a thing isn't beautiful just because it lasts. There will come a day, a time, when every person in this room experiences a grand intersection of phases. A moment where they achieve the happiness they deserved all along. And in that moment, you will know that you've embraced your past, you have accepted your future, and finally become a person greater than the sum of your parts. Thank you.